Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the 7th round of Norway Chess, which is being held here in Stavanger, Norway. Now, yesterday, I had a tough match against Fabiano Caruana. We drew our classical game, and then I lost the Armageddon game. And today, we have a very special treat, as in the return portion, or the second half of the event, I have my second classical game against the 5-time world chess champion, the hometown superhero, Magnus Carlsen from Norway. So, I get my second white in a row. As you'll remember, in the first two games of the tournament, I started black against Fabiano and black against Magnus. So today, we have the exact opposite. All right, let's jump right into the action. So here we go. All right, so I started this game with d4. Magnus plays knight to f6, and now I play c4. Actually, I realized I put the name wrong, so give me 1 second. Let me change this. I put Henrik Carlsen, I just realized for some reason. Let me change that. Let's correct that, and now it should look correct. Sorry about that, you guys. I just realized. Let me make sure I've got it all correct. Slight oopsies. Anyway, today playing against Magnus, not against Henrik, and I decided to play d4, knight f6, c4. Magnus plays e6, and now I play the move knight c3, bishop b4, and this move f3. Now, this, of course, once again, is the classic Nimzo Indian defense, but unlike the previous two times against Pragnanon, and of course Fabiano Caruana, I do not play this move e3. Instead, I play this move f3. Now, many of you guys have watched videos online. You're probably very aware of the famous American grandmaster and streamer, Benjamin Feingold, who has always said, never push your f-pawn. But there is a slight difference. Those of us who are professionals at the absolute top level, there are certain things we can do that mere mortals should never try to attempt. It's just like when you watch some ad on TV and you see some motorcyclists, and in a very fine small print, it says, do not attempt this at home, professional motorcyclist or professional stunt person or something along those lines. So those of you guys at home, do not try to attempt this, but as a professional, or sometimes professional, I decide to play this move f3, and this is what is known as the classic Samish variation of the Nimzo Indian. Now, the reason we call this the Samish is that what white tries to do is build this big white center with the pawns from g2 and e4. Now, there are other variations of the Samish. Another one is, of course, in the King's Indian defense, where you get this position with f3, and this is also known as the Samish because white creates a chain of 3 pawns. So, back to the game, I play f3. Now, I have actually played this against Magnus twice in the past, and I have lost both times. Now, one of these games was a heartbreaker. It was the worst game that I ever lost in my career. We have a video of that I did, which was in the Zurich Chess Challenge, I believe in 2014 or 2015, in this variation where I had a plus 10 position against Magnus, and then I went on to lose the game. Now, Magnus also, I also played this against him in Baku as well, and in that game he played c5, in Zurich he played d5. These are the two main moves, and I did expect Magnus to play one of them. He also played the move knight c6 in the recent FIDE World Cup against my cousin Vinny from Germany, also known as Vincent Keimer, in one of the playoff games. So Magnus against me decides to play d5. Now I play the move a3, and he plays the move bishop c3. Now in our match in Zurich all those years ago, Magnus played the move bishop e7. The game continued with e4, takes, e5, d5, and I obtained a dominating position. I was completely winning the game before I made two horrible blunders in a row to throw away a plus 10 position and suffer another tragic classical loss to Magnus. But today, Magnus decides to embark on a new path. He takes on c3, I take, and he plays the move c5. I take on d5, and here he plays the move knight takes pawn. Now, black can also take on d5 with the pawn, but after e3, castles, and bishop to d3, white gets very simple, straightforward play. One of the main lines that occurs with this position, where you get something like this, rook to e8, castles, knight c6, and bishop b2. And white's idea here is quite simple. White wants to push for e4 and build this nice big white center with pawns on the two squares. And there are many, many games over the years that have featured similar positions or this exact position, including some great games from the old days, classics featuring players like Ali Ekins, Jose Raul Capablanca, and many others. So back to the game. Magnus decides to play the modern approach with knight takes pawn on d5. I take the pawn on c5, and here he plays the move queen to a5, trying to go after the pawns on c3 and c5. It also creates a very convenient 90-degree right triangle. Here I play the move e4, trying to build my white center and kick this horse out of the center so that black cannot obtain a nice bastion on the d5 square. Magnus goes knight to e7. If black were to play knight takes pawn on c3 here, after queen to d2, white is actually doing very well, because if black takes on c5, you have bishop b2, and suddenly this long diagonal is open here, and after a move like knight to a4, white is rook c1, hitting the queen and the bishop, or even bishop takes g7. Either way, white has an overwhelming advantage. So Magnus goes knight to e7, keeping this diagonal closed. Now the dark square bishop is not as active. Here I play bishop to e3, and now Magnus decides to castle. Now black could again take the pawn on c3, but after king to f2, castles, knight to e2, and let's say queen to a5, for example. After white goes queen d2, white has the two b's, and down the road, white actually should be quite a bit better in the endgame. So Magnus castles, and here I play queen to d2. Now, the main line in this position is queen b3, but instead I decided to try and trick Magnus a little bit by playing this slightly less common move. Magnus goes rook to d8 here, and now I play queen to b2, and now we get the move knight to a6, trying to target this pawn on c5. Now, temporarily, white is up a pawn here, but at this point, I was out of my preparation. Prior to the game, the one line I had looked at was this move knight d7, rook to d1, knight c6, and now this move knight to h3 to put the knight on f2, go bishop e2, and castle my king out of the center of the board. But when Magnus played knight a6, I was definitely a little bit surprised. I hadn't looked at this, but it's also a very logical human move to play here. So after a bit of a think, I decided to play knight h3. Now, this is the move that I played because I knew that in the other line with the knight on d7, the knight going to h3 was the correct move, but also because in this position, the other line I thought about, which was takes, and knight e2, I thought after knight c6, castles, and knight to e5, the knight is jumping here. It's jumping to either the c4 or d3 square, and my pieces are not super active here. Say I go queen c2, knight c4, let's say bishop f2, and e5 here. No square for the horse on d4. I have a weakness on a3. Black can go bishop to e6. And there's a kebab idea with rook to d2 as well. And just in general here, even the computer thinks that white is okay. I personally would never want to play this position. So I decided to play this move knight h3 instead, and this is a move that I thought just made sense based on the fact that black cannot capture right away because now I have queen to b4, black has to trade the queens, and now after a takes b4, suddenly white has the two b's in an endgame, and black is lacking in development with all these three pieces on the back rank. But Magnus, true to form, finds a very good move here, which is e5, trying to activate the light square b. I go knight to f2, and now he plays the move bishop e6. Now, one of the great things for black here is black does not have to hurry to capture the pawn, because in this position, I can never take the pawn on b7, because then I hang the pawn on c3, and I lose the game. And otherwise, it's very, very hard still to guard the pawn on c5. So here I play this move knight to d3, trying to put pressure on the pawn on e5, and now Magnus plays the move queen c7. Now, this was an excellent move, but it was not the move that I expected him to play. The move that I was most concerned about was rook a c8 here, trying to put pressure on the pawn, but also intending to play bishop c4 down the road. Now, the reason I was so concerned about this is because if I play a move like king f2 with the idea of going bishop e2, black has this very nasty move f5 with the idea of f4 to kick this bishop off this diagonal. Additionally, black can also try to sack the rook with knight takes pawn, takes, and rook takes c5. And if I take here, maybe after king e1, I'm still okay, but it looks very, very scary with all these active pieces for black. And in this position, my two towers on a1 and h1 are simply not in the game. If Magnus had played rook c8, by the way, my intention was to play this move rook to d1 here. And after bishop c4, I was simply going to play this move bishop to e2. And after takes, I thought I could take, knight c5, and play something like bishop e2, followed by queen b4. And I assumed I was okay, but I was not 100% certain. Instead, Magnus does play queen c7, and now I play the move queen b5, trying to stop black from putting the bishop on c4, and the game ends in what seems like probably a pretty premature way here as we get a repetition, and the reason we get a repetition here is I simply didn't see anything better. Now, the computer says I could play queen b1 here, and after bishop e6, bishop e2, bishop c4, maybe I can castle, but after takes, and knight c5, even though white has the two b's, white has these isolated, or not isolated, but these split pawns on c3 and a3. They're simply not great here. Black can go b6 to create a bastion, rook c8 here, and the bishops are just very passive. The bishop on c2 is behind a pawn wall, has basically no scope. The bishop on e3 also staring at a relatively dead diagonal as well, so two b's are simply not all that strong. So I decided to make the practical decision here and make the repetition and draw the game before I get into any danger. Now, obviously, with the tournament situation, it's not what I was hoping for, to make a quick draw in classical with the white pieces against Magnus, because in the remaining 3 rounds, he has 2 whites and I only have 1. So it's not optimal, but nonetheless, it's better to make the draw than risk getting into a much worse position and losing a long game. So the first game ends rather prematurely. We get the quick draw and we move to the classic Armageddon. So in the Armageddon game, once again, I have the white pieces with 10 minutes versus Magnus' 7 minutes. Now, it's always a question of how do you approach the Armageddon game. Do you choose to play the same opening and make some minor improvement and hope that it works out? Do you completely change it up? Ultimately, I asked my wife what I should do in this situation because I really didn't have a strong preference. I thought, well, maybe I play the same thing, something random. Yesterday, obviously, I repeated the same opening against Fabiano from the classical game, and it did not work out well. So I asked my wife, she said, play the same thing. So alas, you listen to your wife. That is some good advice for anybody at home. If you do not listen to your wife, bad things will happen. Or as I like to say, the famous phrase, it's happy wife, happy life. Anyway, enough digression. Let's get into the Armageddon game. So here I play d4, knight f6, c4, Magnus goes e6, I play knight c3, and now he decides to play d5, deviating from our classical game and not repeating with bishop b4, and instead we end up in what is known as the classic Queen's Gambit decline. So I trade the pawns on d5, I go bishop g5, Magnus plays bishop e7, e3, h6, bishop h4, and now he plays this move bishop g4. Now this move might look a little bit awkward, but in fact Magnus has played this a few times in recent memory, so I was ready for this variation. So I go f3. We get bishop e6, bishop d3, we get c5, I play knight e2, and Magnus goes knight c6. Now, those of you guys who probably play the traditional Queen's Gambit decline, one of the reasons that Magnus played bishop g4 is he did not want to play this classic structure with c6. Now, this structure, for those of you guys who are world enthusiasts, probably will know this is what we call the Carlsbad structure. I believe it's because it was played in the city of Carlsbad, or Karlsruhe in Germany many, many years ago. But when Magnus goes bishop g4 to provoke f3 here, his idea is to play c5, and he's hoping to put pressure on this diagonal or pressure on the central pawn base with the pawn on d4. So I go knight e2, we get knight c6, I castle, he castles, and now I play this move rook e1, Magnus goes rook e8, and now I play the move bishop to c2, intending to take on d4 and recapture with the queen if I can, to put pressure on this isolated pawn on d5 with bishop b3 and rook a d1. So Magnus goes rook c8, and now I play this move knight to f4. Now, it's worth pointing out that this was preparation. This is something that I had looked at recently, so I was not just making this up as I went. And this also helps a lot because with all these quick moves, I start to build a bit of an advantage on the clock. So after knight f4, Magnus thinks a little bit. He takes on d4, and this is simply based on sort of a mistake in terms of Magnus's reasoning. Now, as all of you guys at home know, I have a very, very bad score against Magnus, whether it's in classical chess, whether it's Armageddon, all these different things. And many of these games, not all, of course, because I don't want to sell Magnus short, make it sound like I'm making excuses for the loss, but in many cases, I've made blunders very early in the game, specifically in the opening phase. And I think that in this game, Magnus actually assumed that this was the me of old, simply playing too fast and not paying attention. Alas, he was mistaken, because this was not a bluff by me. When I played knight f4, the variation Magnus goes for, pawn, takes, and knight d4 is not good. Magnus probably thought, well, Hikaru, he's moving too fast, he's blundering once again, thinking that if I were to take what looks like a free horse, there's bishop c5, simply winning this queen on d4. Alas, this was still preparation, and I blitz out the move bishop g6, and now Magnus plays the move rook f8. Now, the computer gives a very strange line with knight to f6 here, bishop takes rook, and I guess after queen takes, black is okay with a bishop and a pawn for the rooks. I can't take the pawn due to the classic fossil with bishop c5, picking up the rook on e6, but this is all very, very dank. Magnus plays the move rook f8 instead, and now I go bishop to f2, targeting the knight on d4. Magnus has to move the juicer away, and now I win the pawn on e6. And in this position, white has a significant advantage because of the isolated pawn on d5, as well as the two b's here, the bishops on f2 and g6, which are very active. So Magnus goes d4. I play knight e2, and you'll notice at this point also, the game is definitely going in my favor, because when you look at the time situation, Magnus is already down 5 minutes on the clock. So I play knight e2, and now Magnus plays this move bishop c5. The computer says that the weird move knight d5 is apparently best, simply jettisoning the pawn on d4. But in a blitz game where you have to move quickly, you don't have all day to think, it's not really natural. And so Magnus plays the natural human move bishop c5 to protect this pawn on d4. Here I play the move knight to f4, and the basis behind this move is it's a very sneaky move. Now, initially, when I was thinking here, I wasn't sure if I want to play knight f4. I used more than a minute on this move, because I thought after knight d5, if I have to trade the knights here, black is probably fine. Sure, in this position, I have the two b's, but it's going to be very hard to prove an advantage. But luckily, as I used my time, I started to think about more options. I realized that after knight f4, the move knight d5 was not possible, as we'll see in the game. And if knight d5 isn't possible, let's say black plays a move like, I don't know, bishop b6. Now I can go queen b3, king h8, and something like bishop d3 with the idea of knight g6, or maybe even knight e6 down the road, and black is in a lot of trouble. Magnus here plays the move knight d5 very quickly, simply overlooking the reason behind my move, which is now I can play the brilliant move queen to b3, threatening to win this knight on d5, and now black is in all kinds of trouble. Now, the reason black is in all kinds of trouble is if you take what looks like a free horse with a rook, then I have rook to e8 check, queen takes rook, I take the queen right away, and now black has to go like knight e7 here, and after, say, bishop d7, followed by bishop e6 or bishop b5, white should be winning the game. So, you can't really take with the rook because of rook e8, but if you take with the knight, as happens in the game, now I have rook to d6 check, creating the classic fossil where I check the king and I win the queen at the same time. There really are no other options for black here, by the way. If you try to move the knight to, say, b4 to overprotect the knight on d5, now I can go a3, attacking the knight, and black's pieces are all just in a heap of trouble. Everything is super loose, and white is probably winning. So Magnus plays knight takes f4. I go rook to d6 check. Worth pointing out that rook e8 actually loses the game because then black has queen to d5, and suddenly I'm just down a piece for nothing. So I go rook d6 check, we get king h8, I take the queen, he takes, I go queen takes b7, knight e5, and now I play bishop e4. Now the amazing thing here is that after bishop b6, even though white is better, black has this pass pawn with the rook behind it, so it still requires quite a bit of technique to win the game. Now here I am up 4 minutes on the clock, but the main thing is to try and play good moves, because here it's more about finding the best moves, because I know if I find the best moves, a queen is worth more than a rook and a knight. So whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry, you guys, my bad. Oh, I just spoiled it. Sorry. I hit the down button instead of the forward button. I apologize for that. Spoiler alert. So we get to this position where I play a4, and I'm not going to hit the page down button. I'm going to hit the forward button. And here Magnus plays knight c4. Now I go queen to a6, going after this knight on c4. And now Magnus plays the move knight to d2. Here I play a5, get bishop c5, and now I put the bishop on b7. And the main thing that I'm trying to focus on here is to stop black from being able to push this pawn down the board, because here if you push the pawn, you simply lose the bishop on c5. So Magnus goes knight b3, I play rook d1, we get d3, I chop, I take on a7, and at this point I'm feeling very good about my position because black only has this passed pawn, and I have these pawns on the queen side. I'm trying to push p, and I figure that at this point I should win the game. So Magnus trades on b7, goes rook e8, now I play g3, and this move is completely fine, but the problem with this move g3 here is that when I go g3, it forces Magnus into a situation where he must go d2 to play for rook to e1 check, and now I have to think and figure it out. Now here, after a long think, I play a huge blunder, this move queen to b4. What I should have played here was the move king f1, and in fact, this was my initial idea because the line that I saw was knight d3, takes, check, not rook e2, check, king g2, and knight to f4. It looks like black creates a fossil, and after takes, rook d2, black is in the game. I guess white's still winning somehow, but black is in business. But after knight f4, I can play the cool move king to f2, attacking the rook on e1, and here black is simply lost. After takes, king d1, checking king e1 and king d1. I'm just pushing a6, a7, a8, and black loses the game. And if you don't take the rook, if you move the rook away even, then I just trade the rooks, and I win the knight, and I win the game this way. But what I realized as soon as I was about to play king f1 is that black has this move knight to d5 here, threatening to go knight to e3, forking the king and the rook. And I simply panicked and didn't calculate this line to its natural conclusion. And if I had played king f1 and knight d5 occurred on the board, I would have figured it out, because the only move that white can play here is rook takes pawn. And after knight e3, you can play his move king to e1. And even though it looks like black has all kinds of fossils, all kinds of discovered checks in this position, white is actually winning. If you go knight c4, checking the king and attacking the rook at the same time, I simply block and win the game. If you go knight g2, I can slide over, and after knight e3, king c1, rook c8, king b1, I win the game as well. If you play rook to e1, here, knight to e3, now I can go king c3, check, king b3, rook takes d2, queen a8 check, king h7, queen to e4, picking up the horse, and after here, and queen takes e3, let's just say rook c d1, I can go queen e8, king h7, and now I can just start pushing p with a6, a7, pushing the b pawn up the board, and this should be very straightforward. The only other trick I guess that exists here is something like knight f1, for example, but here I don't take the horse, I instead play rook to e2, and again, I simply win the game. So the problem is that I simply panicked in this position, and then I play this move queen b4, which now gives black a great response, rook to d4, attacking the queen on b4, and now if I take the rook, there's knight to e2, creating a fork, and black is back in business. So after composing myself, realizing that I had made a blunder, I decided to sack the queen on d2, We get takes, knight to e6, and now I play this move b4, trying to push p on the queen side. Now, I'm not actually in any danger here of losing because I have 3 pawns for the knight, but it's still very, very unclear whether I can win the game. Magnus goes king g8. Here I play b5. We get rook to a8. And now I play this move rook to a2. Now, the big problem, as I realized during the game, is that if I play a6 here, black can go knight c7. And after rook b2, black will sack the knight for the 2 pawns on the queen side. And with a 3v2 on the king side, this is a theoretical draw. So I go rook to a2, we get king f7, I play this move king to f2, and now we have king to e7, I go b6 here, and what I realize is that I'm not going to win this game on the board necessarily, so I have to try and keep these 2 pawns alive, and then create some kind of counterplay on the king side because I'm up on time here. So we get knight c5, I go king e3, Magnus plays king d6. Now this is a move that is okay, but it's not what I would have probably played in the situation. I thought that Magnus should have played rook to a6 here, simply blockading the pawns, because now if I play a move like rook c2, you can simply take the pawn, and after b7, takes, check, and king f8, takes, king g8. Once again, we're in a 3v2 here, but this should be a draw, even though black has very little time. Magnus instead goes king d6, and now I'm able to play king f4. And the reason that I don't like this, even if it's still okay, is now there are tricks again, because I'm using this king, I'm trying to infiltrate and win the pawns on the king side. Magnus goes g6, stopping me from entering with the king, but now I play h4 with the idea of maybe going h5 and king f5. We get king d5, I play king g4, and now it's starting to spiral a little bit because my idea is h5, and black will not be able to stop me from getting the king in. So we get king c6, I play h5, we get rook g8, I play rook c2, king b5, and this is wrong. What I should have done is I should have taken and played king h4 here, trying to push p with f4, f5, and the game goes on. Now, of course, black should draw the game, but it's still very tricky. Instead, I play rook c2, we get king b5, I take on g6, Magnus takes, and now I play king h5, and here Magnus Carlsen flags. He runs out of time and loses the game. Now, I should have still played king h4 here. King h5 was actually a mistake because I thought that after rook takes g3, I could sack the rook, and after takes b7, I thought rook g8, a6 was winning, because if king d6, a7, I get a queen and win the game, but black can just go king b6, stopping the pawns, and black wins the game. So if Magnus had a little bit more time, he probably finds rook g3 and saves the game. But alas, after king h5, he runs out of time. He's down to 2 seconds, and I get a very, very critical win in the Armageddon game. Now, it's a nice win. Obviously, I'm a little bit unhappy with how I obtained it because I was winning for most of the game with the queen for the rook and the knight. It became very wild, but I still do get the win when all is said and done. Now, on the flip side, I would tell you guys, much as I have with the other Armageddon games, whether I win or lose, I don't really look at it as being that big of a deal. I know some people make it out, be like, oh, you won the match, you lost the match. For me, I feel like it's all about the classical chess, and if I play well in classical, that's what matters the most to me. So even though I could be really happy about it, to me, it's just another day at the office where I drew the classical game, and then we played the Clown Fiesta show, and I happened to come out on top in this game. So, I get this win in the Armageddon. That does give me 1.5 points. That means that going into the 8th round tomorrow, I will only be half a point behind Magnus. He will be leading me by a half a point, meaning that if I'm able to draw and win an Armageddon, and he draws his game in classical and loses, the results will be, we will be tied for first place. So it does matter from that standpoint. I still do think that most likely this tournament will come down to the classical portion. Whoever wins the game and gets those crucial 3 points will win. But nonetheless, I am happy with how I've played overall, and I do end up getting that extra half point from the Armageddon game today. So, all's well that ends well. Tomorrow will be the 8th round. I will be playing as Alireza Firouzja, the talented wonderkin from Iran, now representing France. Should be a big game. He's currently in a big dogfight with Fabiano Caruana. I have no idea what's going to happen in that game, but I do think it will be decisive, and that may play some role in terms of what the opening is tomorrow. But at any rate, that's going to be it for me. That's going to be it for now from me. So I do hope you guys have enjoyed this recap. Make sure that you smash that subscribe button below if you're not already subscribed to the channel. And I will see you guys tomorrow with a recap after the 8th round here from Norway Chess in Stavanger. See you guys soon. Hope you enjoyed the show. Have a good one. Bye.